From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
This part of the episode is also being recorded on January 7th. We are entering the realm of some speculation. We're trying our best to stick with things that have been proven. However, we do want to issue the disclaimer that some of the things we discussed today may be answered between the time we record this episode and the time it publishes on Monday. Here's where it gets crazy. Chaos. Gentlemen, chaos and fatalities. We raised a point earlier about why we have made the decision not to refer to this group of insurrectionists as protesters. I think we can agree there is a hell of a difference between smashing the window of a Starbucks and invading a nation's capital while Congress is in session in hopes of subverting democracy. Or, as the supporters of these acts would argue, attempting to save democracy, I guess. Either way you slice it, fatalities occurred. Fatalities are always going to be a tragedy. Whether or not you agree with a person, whether or not you agree with their actions that led to their demise. At 4 p.m. on January 6, 2021, a woman was shot as the mob stormed the Capitol, scaling walls, breaking windows to gain entry. A San Diego resident named Ashley Babbitt was shot in the chest by law enforcement as she attempted to enter the building through one of the broken windows. She did not die immediately. She was given medical attention, but did unfortunately pass away. We know a little bit more about her as the news emerged, but for a long time she was simply acknowledged as the unidentified first injury and then the first fatality. Later reports would cite 3 more fatalities from what was originally described just vaguely as medical conditions. We do have the answers on those now. I will go ahead and give it to you. The reports say that one of the fatalities was a heart attack in reaction to a flashbang grenade. The second fatality was a fall, a 30-foot fall off scaffolding from the Capitol building. And then the third fatality, individual carrying a taser accidentally tased himself and as a result had a fatal heart attack.
It's easy to snicker at that one a little bit, but like you said, every death is a tragedy. And that scaffolding would have been those scaffolding on either side in the lawn that were set up for the inauguration coming up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we should mention also, I don't think we got to it in the first part of this series, but there were other things erected by the mob, such as a gallows, which is a very loaded symbol, but a gallows was erected with people in the crowd chanting that they were going to hang Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House. Then I believe a large cross was erected. I do not know at this point whether it was set aflame.
It's also worth mentioning, too, that just a few days prior, there were, I don't know, let's call them attacks, I guess, or at the very least, acts of intimidation on both Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell's private residences. The Nancy Pelosi one is particularly disturbing because it says, what does it say? Sack, cancel, rent, we want everything. And then there is a severed pig's head with blood strewn everywhere. And this is right in front of her garage in San Francisco.
And Mitch McConnell vandalism at his performative home in Kentucky, and I'll tell you why I think that's performative, that vandalism, I think, was related to the divisive proposal to provide additional COVID relief for people who are suffering through unemployment and obviously enormous medical bills, as happens anytime someone has an illness in the United States. I say performative because, and this is not just a ding on McConnell, this is common with a lot of lawmakers, you have to have a legal residency in the state that you represent or purport to represent. But from what I understand, at least, I don't want to speak for everybody, but what I understand, at least, McConnell spends the vast majority of his time at his D.C. residence because, like many members of Congress, there are times where he needs to spend most of his time in D.C. So odds are he was not at the home or at the structure in Kentucky when it was vandalized.
And really quickly, also just to say, what I was thinking when you said performative, in addition to that, was it's not a small house, but it's not a monolithic mansion either. So it gives sort of the impression of like, I'm one of you, I'm one of the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Noel. And of course, this is just based on what we see with a lot of politicians. If there's proof that McConnell spends the majority of his time at the Kentucky residence, then of course that's the fact of the matter. But from what we understand now, that is not the case, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when you are in the halls of power like this, you do need to be on the scene pretty frequently. We mentioned. We mentioned a little bit of reaction from the officials, from the politicians. You may recall that President-elect Joe Biden took to stage first before current President Donald Trump and called for civility, of course, called for into violence, said this is not what America represents, and then specifically called on President Trump to make a statement. At 4:15, January 6th, Donald Trump released a statement. It was taped, not live. He repeated his belief that the election was stolen, and he is convinced, in his opinion, the truth will out. And then he told the insurrectionist, quote, "We love you. You are very special," following up with, "I understand where you're coming from," essentially, I'm paraphrasing there, and then told them to go home. I do want to point out my initial reaction on Twitter there, just because I suspected that taped statement might be taken down off of the platforms he was using at the time, was to quote that specifically. And I said, "We love you. You are very special. Donald Trump to domestic terrorists, January 6th, 2021. That's on my personal Twitter. That is not representative of the views of our network necessarily. That's at Ben Bolin, HSW, on Twitter.
It's a great account to follow. I also would add, this ties right back into his primary focus on loyalty above all. He's hanging on to this contingent. This is kind of all he has left. This is his last ditch effort here, and he is appealing to that sense of loyalty. I love you. I feel your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it. Front loading it with that, and then ending it with, "But go home." Like, I'm into what you're doing. I support what you're doing because what you're doing supports me, but stop or don't. That's the vibe that I got.
And Matt, to your earlier point about the use of language, the nuanced use of language here, there is an explicit statement in this taped recording, and in this statement, he explicitly says, "We don't want anybody hurt." What do you think about the language of that statement, Matt?
To me, it's all a deflection. The statement and this entire thing, where earlier in the day he made statements that we discussed in the last episode about how we have to fight and fight really hard, and we have to essentially prevent this from happening and do everything we can to prevent it from happening, and then to say, "Look, you guys tried, but let's all be peaceful and go home." It's all a deflection off of himself, is what it feels like to me. And I know I don't know. I know some people will take issue with that, but it feels very much like that to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at around 5 p.m., so about 45 minutes after this statement is disseminated, officers on the scene do deploy flashbang grenades and the tear gas we mentioned earlier in an attempt to clear remaining members of the mob from specifically the west side of the Capitol before that 6 p.m. curfew hits. Now, I may have pickled some cucumbers or ruffled some feathers with the phrase domestic terrorism. It's not an attempt to be hyperbolic. It's not an attempt to be alarmist. Here is why I use that phrase quite deliberately. Because at least 2 IEDs, improvised explosive devices, were found. The street name for these would be pipe bombs. And they weren't just targeting, the ostensible political opponents of Donald Trump. There was one pipe bomb at the local RNC office. There was another one at the local DNC office. There was also more stuff found, but this was on the actual grounds of the Capitol.
Yeah, there was also a long gun found and a cooler full of Molotov cocktails on the Capitol grounds. A long gun it's not quite a sniper rifle. It's something along those lines. It's a long range weapon, right?
It could be any rifle, but really, it wasn't defined in the moment there.
Okay, got it.
Which means that the specific make is yet to be released or publicly identified. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't be surprised if there's an investigation into, chain of ownership for that, fingerprints, things of that nature. But at this point in the story, we are post-breach, as the news has taken to calling it, post-invasion, as some others have called it. The insurrectionist mob has occupied the Capitol for a number of hours, 5 hours, I believe. Does that sound about right, guys?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So about 5 hours, they're roaming freely through the offices of Congress. And here again, we can see numerous photographs. The phrase we use often in the South is telling on themselves. We can see photos from the insurrectionists as they shout from the floor of the House or the Senate, saying things like, Donald Trump won this election. You can see one guy's got his feet propped up, I guess is the word, in the office of Nancy Pelosi. They are earlier, as we mentioned, they were taking selfies with some members of law enforcement. They were also posting videos, social streams, photographs on social media, left and right. Many of these people were not attempting to disguise themselves, neither their faces nor their voices nor mannerisms.
And let's not forget that none of them are wearing masks during a global pandemic. I just wanted to point that out. Not wearing masks to shield their identity, or for the maybe more practical reason of to protect themselves and others from COVID. And another popular rallying cry was, "This is our house. This is our house," because the Capitol is referred to as the People's House, and that's a reference to that. And they're like, "We're taking it back. This is our house."
Mm-hmm. And several individuals in this group are self-identifying, self-describing as revolutionaries, not protesters. Again, there's a reason. There are reasons that we're being very specific with the terms here. You can absolutely protest. You can absolutely disagree. As a matter of fact, I would say it is American to do so. We have hundreds of years of precedence on why dissent in some way is important and crucial to the health of the nation, but this is not the same thing. You can see images of this mob roaming door to door, shouting, quote, "Where the fuck are they?" What do you think they're talking about? You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure they're talking about members of Congress. And then as more photos come out, people start delving in. We see particular things that make this look less and less like some attempt at a peaceful occupation. There is an individual who appears to be armed, carrying zip ties. This is strong circumstantial evidence that at least some factions of these groups intended to either physically harm or physically take possession of members of Congress or their associated staff members. I don't know. Do you guys think I'm reading tea leaves there?
Nope.
That's what I think the zip ties are for.
I think so.
I think
yeah.
you can say at least one individual was
Correct.
was planning on doing something like that or had that crazy idea.
Another thing I saw quite a lot of were baseball bats and just kind of bludgeony type weapons, Mob 101.
Yeah.
Surprised there weren't pitchforks.
I think we just I agree with everything you guys are saying. I think we just have to keep in mind that there's a percentage of people who were there who I think you could describe as insurrectionists. There's also a group of people there, I don't know how many, there's no way for us to know, but a group of people there that were just caught up in that mob mentality after going to that rally and getting all riled up and having some similar feelings that are of connection to either the president or whatever ideologically is being fought for, that are just, they happen to be there and they happen to continue, and now they've found themselves inside the Capitol. I think we just have to say that.
Yeah, I hope I did a good job establishing that in part one as well. But you're right, we do have to say that. And the one thing I would note, the one reason I'm saying factions or individuals, Matt, rather than simply one person with zip ties, is because if you look at the forums in the time leading up to this, again, premeditated event, we see people writing, here's our plan, here's what we're going to do. Are they just being internet tough guys? Were all those messages from that one guy? I don't know. Only one person is shown with zip ties, though. It's a very fair point.
Agreed. And I can only imagine the moment of realization some of those lesser problematic elements felt when they realized how in over their heads they were and how they took it too far. And now they're getting swept up in something they maybe weren't fully prepared to be a part of.
That's true. I mean, think about this too. If you look through the photographs, you see people who do not appear as if they came to the Capitol with the express aim of doing violence to anyone. You see quite elderly people. I think, did you guys see those photographs as well?
I haven't seen those.
Yeah, and you can go on live. This is one of the best times to use the service LiveLeak. If you go on LiveLeak, you can watch videos. There's one of a Capitol police officer attempting to prevent a bunch of people from coming up some steps and then getting into another vestibule area. And he's got his baton out and, saying, get back, get back, get back, and attempting to do his best to prevent people from coming up. But he's one person and there's a large mass of people moving towards him. So he, retreats back up to the stairs where there's a larger number of officers, Capitol police officers inside the building. And at that point, once the group moves into this area where the police officers are and the police officers move in to meet the group, the officers are fully outnumbered, but the individual human beings that are there, that are not supposed to be there, are standing their ground and just standing there and refusing to leave. But they're not being violent, and they don't appear to be, what I heard in the audio was there's no violent things being discussed. It was just they decided they were going to place themselves in that Capitol building. And then the police officers at that point cannot respond with force because they are vastly outnumbered in an interior position. So strategically that becomes, I guess what I'm saying is there's so much going on and there's so much chaos, which is the word we used at the very top of this episode, that, what we're doing is giving you, everybody listening, all the varying pieces of the groups that may be involved. And it's so varying. We're just going to give you everything that we have seen.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm in absolute agreement on that. I don't want to seem as though I am somehow not. One thing I think you guys would find of interest is that there was a stated calculus to this, because in the world of PR, they would call some things optics, right? There's some things that look like really bad optics where you see you see the police, clearly allowing people entry into, let's call it an outer perimeter of the Capitol. So later statements said that I appreciate the use of the word strategic, the strategic plan there, or the strategy there, I should say, is that given that these forces are vastly outnumbered, they wanted to create a smaller perimeter that they could defend feasibly. You know what I mean? Because otherwise, if there's just a line that's 2 or 3 officers deep, then it could easily get overrun and it could easily get escalated into a very violent situation. So that is the stated logic. And I love that you're bringing up the fact that not all of the officers appeared to be on the same page. That's very, very important. You know what I mean? It's not like all of the law enforcement in DC said, hey, let's leave this open. Let's tear down these barricades and stuff. You can see documented on LiveLeak, on other platforms, you can see people who are clearly just trying their best to maintain some sort of order and to de-escalate things, even though they are woefully, woefully outnumbered. You can also see, I've said several times here that this is premeditated. You can also see details in these images that I think strongly indicate there was premeditation, again, in factions of this force. One of the things would be the T-shirts. You could see these T-shirts bearing slogans with things like Auschwitz Camp, which is a reference to genocide in World War II and clearly anti-Semitic in nature. You can also see T-shirts saying things like Civil War, January 6th, 2021. And you could see other reports of other T-shirts, other paraphernalia, of course. And the building itself the interior, I believe, was secured in the early evening, but crowds remained outside into the night. And there was this thing happening, I believe it was first part of this episode, we talked about the use of language, both in media and in politics. And let me know if you guys noticed this. Matt, Noel, I know we were all watching this. Did you notice that a lot of the anchors seemed to be waxing a little bit poetic when they were talking about the curfew? They were like, the curfew's at 6 p.m. The sun is already setting on Washington and the country, or like the light is falling on the Capitol.
The friscolating dusk light.
Yeah. Everything has been feeling like a scripted reality show lately, and it's just all part of it, guys.
That's very good foreshadowing, right?
Or the simulation, perhaps.